Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. My name is Laura Deneen. I'm your host for today's episode. Welcome. If you're new to the podcast, we are just so thrilled to have you. We, in our earlier seasons, talked about generalized mental health concepts, and we've recently niched down to talk more so on the topic of body image. And we really are about helping you move towards peace and acceptance with your body. And so some episodes it'll be me, some it might be Lauren, and then we also have guests on as well to share some of their expertise. If you're looking for therapy in the state of Tennessee, we would love to see you through our sister company, Anchored Counseling Company. And if you're not local to us, we encourage you to reach out to someone local to you if you're seeking therapy services. So today I thought I might switch it up for a little bit, and we are actually going to do some Q&A. And so I had some questions that kind of came to mind that frequently come up for me as a body image therapist, and I want to walk through a few of those with you all today. So the first question we have that comes up again quite frequently in my work as a body image therapist is, my friend is on a diet. What do I do? Okay, so this is complex and I'm going to ramble about this for a little bit. So if you're newer to the body image space, or maybe you've been at this for a while, this can lead to a lot of emotionality because one's relationship with food is typically deeply intertwined with one's relationship with body, right? And so as we're healing our body image, we typically are also healing our relationship with food or our relationship with rest or movement. I think the first thing that I want to say to this is that this can be really complex, especially if you are someone that is trying to move towards more peace with your body. You are trying to eat consistently and adequately, and you have a friend or maybe one of your close friends is going on a diet and trying to actively change something about their bodies. And so whether this diet is that person trying to lose weight or change something about their body, or maybe a professional has recommended something about their diet, that can just trigger a lot for someone that is trying to accept their own body. And so the first thing that I would say to this is just validation for you in this experience, to our listener who asked this question. So really just validating that this is really hard, validating whatever emotional response might be there for you. So you'll notice if you're watching, I have my hand over my heart. So just getting curious about what that is. Is it anger? Is there disappointment? Is there hurt? Is there maybe confusion or fear around how that might impact your relationship with this person? So first, we have to really quiet the external noises and get really curious about our internal experience around a friend of ours being on a diet. So whatever emotion is there, I want to encourage you to quietly identify it and to give yourself compassion. Our emotions are not right or wrong. They just are. And so our tendency is to judge ourselves once we identify an emotion or to criticize that emotional state. And I'm here to offer you a different way. So first, I want you to identify what comes up for you when you think about this friend being on a diet. And then next, I want you to go back to your why. So we talk a lot about this in the therapeutic space, but motivation is really important. And staying the course is really important, especially as we're healing our body image. But go back to really naming and identifying why you started your journey towards body acceptance. So most likely you experienced consequences around behaviors, or maybe you are in recovery from an eating disorder, or maybe you just want a better quality of life or a better relationship with your body. So you have to really know what your why is, especially in the culture that we live in. So the term that we've used quite frequently on this podcast is diet culture, and dieting is everywhere. People making different choices around their diets or what they're eating or not eating, the noise is really, really loud. And so consistently coming back to our why can be helpful in terms of remembering why you started on this journey of body peace. And I would encourage you to not only name that, but like write that down in the notes section of your phone, share it with a loved one, because that will help you stay the course and be consistent in your body image healing journey. And then next, I want you to think through what your needs are in the context of your relationship with this person. Do you want to say something to that person, right? And of course, like everyone gets to make their own choices and has free will, but the reality is you get to decide how you want to handle this situation moving forward. So do you want to have an assertive conversation and share about your own body image story or own body image experiences? Do you maybe realize that you might need some space from that person? So if someone is actively on a diet, they might be prone to talking about their diet or talking about maybe the amount or numbers of, the amount of weight that they've lost, and that might be triggering for you. And so figuring out, maybe do you need some space from that person? Do you need to set a boundary of spending less time, energy, resources of pouring into that person during this season when they've elected to go on a diet? And then conversely, I think the question becomes like, who can my safe people be? If this person is on a diet and I've recognized that I need more space and I need to set a boundary in my relationship with them, then who can I get support from during this season? Everyone gets to make their own choices. And oftentimes we can want things for other people that they might not want for themselves. And so I think that just even identifying that of like, there's grief if you are on your body image healing journey and you have a friend who is not yet there. And your friend may be making choices that you don't agree with. And that's really hard. And so figuring out relationally what you need for yourself to continue showing up authentically in that relationship would be some of my best advice. So my friend's on a diet. What do? I think in this, just having an abundance of compassion for yourself, recognizing that you have choices that are available to you. You're not helpless, and figuring out how you can care for yourself through that experience. Okay, question number 2. I'm afraid of gaining weight. I chuckled not to mock this question, but really just to normalize how frequently this question comes up. So as people are moving towards body peace or more body acceptance, maybe this is the first time in years that you have not restricted what you've eaten. Or maybe this is the first time in years when you have not been on some sort of fad diet or chronic diet. And so it makes sense that that fear of weight gain will come up. Like I mentioned before, we live in a society that is fairly problematic, that praises weight loss, that elevates a thin ideal, that is fatphobic in nature, that's weight-centric in nature. Now, we do think overall we're doing a better job talking about it. A lot of that has been because of influencers on Instagram that are really pro-body positivity, pro-body acceptance, and we still have a long ways to go. So it makes sense that, if you've stopped dieting or maybe you are working towards full recovery from an eating disorder, that you might have this fear. So first and foremost, we want to get really tender with the fear. So just like I'm not going to tell my 3-year-old to not be afraid of the dark and shut the door, we have to be careful not to shame ourselves and criticize ourselves when we are afraid. So I do have a 3-year-old girl at home. She's started having a couple nightmares here and there. And so she's recently been afraid of coyotes in the woods. We tend to live with our house backs up to some forest woods area. And so I'm not just going to shut the door and tell her to not be afraid, because that's not going to be helpful for her. It's not going to be nurturing to her system. Now, what I can do instead is remind her how safe we are, some of the precautions that mommy and daddy have taken to lock the door, et cetera, et cetera. That's really an analogy for how I encourage you to approach your fear of weight gain. Instead of dismissing it, instead of pushing it to the side, we want to tend to it. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to believe everything that our fear says, but we have to be curious and we have to be gentle with our fear, just like we would be gentle with a 3-year-old who's afraid of the dark or afraid of coyotes in our backyard. And so that's the first step that I want to encourage you to notice, is even your tendency to like push away the fear or to tell yourself, you shouldn't be afraid. So tending to the fear is really important. And then asking yourself what you're afraid of. So am I afraid that other people will change how they perceive me? Am I afraid of being rejected by my parents? Am I afraid of being mocked? Am I afraid of being treated differently at work? So we have to get really curious about what it is that we're actually afraid of. And it might be different for different listeners. And then how that might be connected to an even deeper fear or longing. For example, maybe a fear of being unlovable, or a fear of failure, or a fear of being rejected. So all of those can be quite common within the body image space. And we have to build insight and awareness around what we're actually afraid of that is so intricately tied to this fear of weight gain. And so what we do with this moving forward is not only tend to the fear and then get curious about what we're afraid of, we have to remember our values. And so going back to the kind of one of the responses to the first question, we have to really look at our value system and ask ourselves why, right? So if my body wants to be at a heavier weight or a more what we call biologically appropriate weight than it is right now, and that's where I'm able to live freely and sleep well and have connection with other people, what are my feelings around that? Can I move through the stages of grief around that instead of just being like, nope, weight gain is not an option? Because oftentimes we tell ourselves things like, if I gain weight, I'll be a loser, or if I gain weight, so-and-so will reject me. And we don't consider how our quality of life might actually improve when we're closer to our biologically appropriate weight. Another piece that I want to encourage you to remember is that oftentimes individuals will have various memories of traumatic experiences that occurred in a certain body or at a certain weight. And so if we don't have insight and awareness around that, we might inadvertently start to blame our bodies instead of healing some of the trauma that is there. And so that's another component too, is looking at, is your trauma story connected with a certain body or weight, and gently starting to unpack that within the therapeutic space. So that's another piece of feedback. We're not going to get super into that point and that perspective today, because I think that absolutely needs to be done with a trauma therapist, but that can also happen. And then lastly, I want to encourage you to look at what your beliefs are around weight in general. So were you raised to believe that fat is bad, or that individuals in larger bodies are lesser than or less worthy? And so unpacking some of that childhood developmental trauma is also going to be important for you as you approach this fear of gaining weight. Because a lot of us were raised in a culture that praised the thin ideal and mocked people in larger bodies. And so we've got to look at our own experiences around fat phobia if we're going to really work towards peace with our bodies, and if we're really going to unpack some of that fear of weight gain. So as you can tell, it's not just one thing, and it's not just like, don't be afraid of gaining weight. And I think a lot of times, even within the body image space, people are maybe afraid to admit this because they have this narrative or this story in their head that like they just shouldn't be afraid of gaining weight. And so I think it takes a humility and a vulnerability to admit this to ourselves, and to admit that this might be something that we're actually afraid of and that we need help unpacking this. And so I hope this answer to this question has given you just some things to either take to your own therapist or some things to marinate on outside of this podcast episode. But yeah, that's a really tender fear, and it's a really complex question. And we, I think, need to approach this with just a level of reverence as we talk about this fear of gaining weight, because there's a lot here. And one thing that can be really helpful just for this question and the first question is remembering that throughout your body image healing, that the work is slow, and that's okay. And that's really, really important, because we heal in slowness. We heal when we have more capacity. And so if you feel like you've been at this for a while, I just want you to know that you're not alone in that, and that that's absolutely appropriate. And each step that you take towards your own healing matters. So thanks for letting me switch it up a little bit today on the Becoming Anchored podcast. Yeah, I just want to encourage you to take some of this feedback, to marinate on it, to consider taking it to therapy, and to remember that each step matters in your body image healing journey. Take good care.